work ethic, and there's practices, habits, things that
Mhm.
you can develop. It's a muscle like anything else.
Tutti, welcome to the Ultrahabits Podcast. It is 7 a.m. here in Melbourne, Victoria. What's going on in the Bay Area?
Oh, it was a rainstorm, and now it's beautiful sunny skies in San Francisco. I'm so glad to be here, RJ.
Yeah, thank you for coming. So I lived in Sydney before, and I am from the Bay Area. And when I moved to Melbourne, I realized while Sydney had the elements of the water and was similar to San Francisco, I actually think Melbourne's more similar in the fact that it's just overcast. It's like there's so many similar qualities. I mean, it's been raining nonstop here to the extent that our roof is leaking, which isn't great. But the show must go on. So thanks for coming.
The show must go on. Got to entertain the peoples.
That's it. That's it. And educate them as well. And that was the reason that I wanted you on the show. I check out lots of different articles. It's where we find a lot of our guests for the show. And one caught my eye, the one on work ethic, and I think it's quite topical. We at Ultra Habits are really into extreme ownership and
Mhm.
accountability. We believe that the solution starts with us, not the other people, and it's about what can we bring to the situation in terms of value. And I think work ethic is a really important topic, and funnily enough, no one ever really talks about. And I guess when you think about work ethic historically, people will kind of just say, well, you either have it or you don't, right?
Yep.
What's your view on that? Like, does everyone have the capacity for it, or are some people just lazy and some people driven?
If you're in this business, this ultra habits building business, I think you and I are aligned on this, which is it's capacity. Everybody
Yeah.
has the capacity to do this. I believe all of these skills are practiced.
Mm.
Some seem to come easier to some people than others. Now, I've been doing related to work ethic. I've been doing a lot of research recently around leadership in Asian American women, and there's a cultural component to this. There's a hardworking, get it done,
Mm.
grind, do it component that I think culturally happens in a lot of Asian cultures, especially ones I've seen with who've immigrated to the United States, which is my group. So I think that work ethic, yes, some of it is really gleaned, culturally nurtured, and there's practices, habits, things
Mm.
that you can develop. It's a muscle like anything else.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So 2 days ago, I was on a call with I'm Indian, grew up in the U.S., and I was on the call with two Indian women,
Hmm.
and we were talking about kind of the immigrants' mindset. And this one woman in particular, we were joking about her son. So she's in India, and she's always had that, like, you've got to figure it out. There's a billion people here. Everyone's educated. Everyone's got master's degrees. Like, you got to figure it out, right? And she goes, like, my son is now in the Silicon Valley, and like he'll get a text or a call from his boss at like 5, and he's like, I'm not taking the call. Or like it's like he's it's almost like the audacity of the guy to ring me at
Yep.
5. And she's like freaking out. She's like, because she's got a completely different mindset. Like she's
Yep.
like, if your boss calls at 5, so where does work ethic end and work life balance start? Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
because
It's a great question.
we got a completely different mindset and generation coming up with different views. Like, is it laziness, or is there a legitimate line there between the two?
I'm a designer by training, and the very annoying designer answer to most questions is it depends.
Depends. Yeah.
It always is. And here's the factors that it depends on. It
Mm.
a whole bunch of different things.
Mm.
And we're talking professionally, work ethic professionally. It depends where you are in your career and what you want to be doing in your entire life
Yeah.
context. Things that I've seen a lot just through trends of research and leadership coaching is that often after graduating university, something like that, people can be really, really hungry and want to do a lot of things, have the energy to be unconstrained from the limitations of academia. I'm like, now I'm working a paycheck. I want to do this. When I've seen a lot of that hunger, which especially in Silicon Valley gets expressed with a lot of people founding companies, work-life balance may not matter then. If you're a co-founder or CEO, you're kind of committed to this, especially like pre-seed for a couple of years. So that is a certain mentality and mindset that you're in where, yeah, if you're that boss, back to your autonomy part, or even if you're an employee, you may want to be doing all that picking up at 5 p.m. and doing more. It's completely different. And, this is a correlation to age. It's not it's not a strict rule, but it's different if you have other things of importance in your life. Maybe you're undergoing a health crisis. Maybe you're training for a marathon. Maybe you have kids. Maybe you have elderly parents. It depends where your professional life fits into the context of your entire life and how much energy you want to put into developing work ethic.
I tell the younger people that I come across, whether I lead them or mentor them, that at some point in your career, you're going to have to go above and beyond for an extended period of time if you are career orientated. And where other people may stop, that's where your opportunity is. Right? So don't moan and bitch about it. Like, get on with it. Like, I think, and I think it's hard when you're in it. And the reality is, like, I can be unreasonable as a leader, but I feel like I match that with a lot of involvement in terms of giving back. I know what I'm asking for is a lot, but I'm very conscious about that. And I make an effort as a leader to match that with a level of commitment to that person as a person, but also as, the development of their skills, which I think is important for leaders. So, we talk about willpower. So a lot on this show, we talk about, like, how do you engage and how do you build your willpower? Do you feel that there's a connection between willpower and work ethic?
I'd say there might be a connection between self-discipline and work ethic. And, self-discipline may be the same thing as willpower, but I would define self-discipline as the process of understanding how we work, including knowing our own work rhythms and where we can push ourselves, and also knowing about our energy. Because if you track your energy throughout the day, I think all of us have different periods of peak energy. Some people are morning people, some people are night owls, and I think it's pretty easy to gather the data by tracking your energetic peaks and troughs throughout a period of time. And part of self-discipline, and I'm calling it self-discipline rather than willpower, is understanding this about yourself and optimizing the tasks and work that you have to do to match your periods of peak or low energy. For example, I'm a writer in addition to coaching and teaching. There's very specific periods where I write really, really well. It's typically in the morning, or it's after, I'm a surfer as well. After I surf, after I exercise in a particular way, there is an upwelling of, like, being outside and creative energy. And then my email admin follow-up tasks, I'll typically put them in at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And different people work differently. I know people who are the most creative at 10 p.m. at night as well. So I wouldn't necessarily call it willpower, because there's something there that is very much like, just put your mind to it and you will be able to make it happen. I believe more in tools and tricks and techniques to optimize what works best for you, which is why I call that angle more self-discipline, as a way to develop what works for you as your work ethic.
That's brilliant. I think the problem with willpower, it's not sustainable, right? And there's no kind of systems to create consistency with that. Now, would you say, talking about that, because I also believe in rhythms, and I believe that a lot of people operate by different rhythms. Like, do you find that certain organizations recognize that better and are more flexible? Like, I mean, I know that I worked in an organization where people thought it was weird that I might nap, right? Like I would nap maybe at like 11. I had to because I was up super early,
Yep.
or I might go for a run for
Yep.
20 minutes. But I'm like, well, you're smoking cigarettes 3 times a day, right?
Right.
Like, it's like, do you find certain organizations kind of recognize that and or are better at that? I know, in the Bay Area, there's a lot of innovation and kind of maybe different ways of working that aren't
Mhm.
necessarily across the globe yet. Like, what have you seen in regards to that?
Most of my background has been in technology companies and startups in
Right.
either the Bay Area or up and down California, up in Seattle, as well. And for technology companies, there is a fierce adherence to autonomy and doing whatever it takes to get your work done. So
Mm,
that that mindset, that zeitgeist falls in line with the things that you're describing very, very well.
mm,
I think there's another interesting corollary to your question, though, which I thought you were going a different way, which is, we've been talking about, you said that there's going to be periods in your life where you're going to have to, if you are career focused, there's going to be parts where you might have to sprint for a really long time.
mm,
What I find is interesting is I think working in large corporations, namely Facebook and some other large ones, I think there's natural rhythms built into the calendar year and seasons of a
wow.
company that simply happen because
Mm,
it's impossible to be in full out extended
mm,
sprint at all
mm,
time.
mm,
I used to work in like in brand agencies building out high concepts. So a peak time was always CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, which is always right after the holidays. So our firm always knew that, yeah, we're going to be working in the holidays and there's going to be sprints around that. But there was an understanding that the rest of January was going to be chill. You can see this a lot in the US with certain e-commerce companies around Black Friday, around the holiday shopping. You can see it around certain um, manufactured events, if you will,
mm,
like high profile company announcements and things like that. And there's always a push up to it.
mm,
And there's a little release afterwards. So I think these rhythms just happen
mm.
naturally because we're human and companies are made of humans.
Such a brilliant observation. I mean, I I cut my teeth as a professional salesperson, right? And I operated what I would call in sprints as well. Like I'd go
Quarters.
hard for a period of time to build a pipeline, and then because you can't sustain a certain level of energy all the time. Now, on the back of that, I wanted to ask you, and I was going to ask you earlier, but I forgot the question. Now it's come to mind just based on what we were talking about. When it comes to work ethic, is it easier for people, like if we're making the assumption that everyone has the capacity for it,
Mhm.
is it easier for people that find, like, what's the connection between work ethic and like passion or purpose?
Mm. I go back to energy. Like, if you are really excited about something with passion and purpose,
Mm,
I don't believe it feels as hard to spend your time
mm,
devoted to it. Really think about what I call the flow state. We've all had it, just that period where you're doing something and you're so immersed in it that hours fly by. And typically it's much more maker work. It's like hands on coding, writing, composing music, whatever it is. I think there's a correlation between that and passion. And I've also seen it with people that you might not be making something, but you might be interacting, generating ideas with a particular group of people that gets into the same type of flow state as well. So I believe that
mm,
there's something that sounds and feels hard about work ethic. Like it's going to take some work. We're going to work hard at it. And I think that when there's something like passion and purpose, there's an ease and a flow to it that almost makes the work ethic question irrelevant because, of course, we're going to be doing it.
and that's right. When times get hard, you can maintain the course, right? Because you
Yeah.
understand what you're doing it for,
The bigger
and you're,
why. Yeah.
yeah, the bigger why, you see the end, and you're more associated with, I suppose, the larger and bigger picture.
Mhm.
Now we're talking about work ethic. So are what are some of the qualities of a good work ethic and conversely a poor work
Yeah.
ethic?
And One of the things I wanted to share too, because you were saying that this wasn't a topic that you had heard a lot about. I think
Yeah.
something that was really interesting is Harvard Business Review actually approached me and said, "Hey, will you write an article on this? Because it's one of their
Wow.
top SEO terms." So
Wow.
people wanted to hear a lot about work ethic. Isn't that fascinating? 'Cause
Yeah.
who would have thought that this is something people wanted to learn about? But so the question you're asking about this qualities of good and poor work ethic, people are like, what is this? What is this mysterious thing? Because I know I want it. It seems really good, but I'm not quite sure what it is. So I want to
Mm,
provide that as a little bit of context. And what I
it's
share about
remarkable. Yeah.
the four qualities that exemplify kind of standard good work ethic is reliability and dependability. It's this consistency over time, being able to meet deadlines, act appropriately, have particular behaviors, and to do it regularly over time. That's what builds trust.
Mm,
A second quality is productivity, being able to complete the tasks and deliver high quality results. A third is this sense, as you were talking about for your watchers, of ownership and autonomy. Really think like an owner, being able to exercise initiative, but also show that, well, you can also take direction from others, learn and improve in that sense of autonomy. And then finally, it's the collaboration. We hardly any of us work solo as lone rangers. It's you got to be able to look beyond your individual role and establish positive working relationships with other people,
mm,
support responsibilities of your team, and act as a team player. So those are the four
mm,
that I found through the research is really being
mm,
okay, kind of universally
mm.
discussed and agreed upon as qualities of a good work ethic. You want
Yeah.
me to go into the opposite, or it's kind of obvious?
Let's unpack this
Okay.
though, right? Because I find that I find that I've found historically that the most uh, dedicated people generally are a bit kind of, there's areas in their life where, like, through work they get a sense of stability,
Mhm.
right? Like, when I'm
Absolutely.
looking at high performers, but with that there comes a massive insecurity in other areas, sometimes even trauma, right? Like,
Yeah,
there's this kind of perfectionism that drives them, but it's a double-edged sword. And I look at people that I've managed that are, like, super comfortable in life and, like, everything is all good. They probably got a little bit more confidence than everyone, that, like, they're not as insecure, and they kind of, they miss a deadline here. It's not a big thing. It just looking at these qualities of reliability, dependability, productivity, like autonomy, ownership,
Mhm.
like, a lot of this is people that hold themselves to a high regard, and they pursue excellence. Now, with that, like I said, like, I've found historically, and this is obviously subjective, that not always is this drive coming from a healthy place,
Yeah.
right? And you may have not done the research, but just speaking on opinion here, like, what's in your view the connection between, let's say, work ethic and um and maybe someone that has a bit of trauma, or someone that is looking to fulfill themselves, maybe with not in a way through work, and it may not be coming from the most healthy place. Like, do you
Yeah.
find there's a connection there?
So I
Or
might talk about something different because, like,
Mhm,
work ethic, we're talking about certain qualities that everyone habits, things that people
mm,
can try on, especially if they're transitioning into their first job to find
yeah,
ways to prove themselves, to be a little bit more reliable, to learn that when they're transitioning from a university setting or from a different school setting, well, these are the things that are expected of a corporate job. I think what you're talking about, and which I completely agree exists, is almost a sense of workaholism, which it's universally celebrated in corporate America, definitely in American culture. I'll go as far as to say it can be an addiction just as anything else, except it's a very universally accepted as a good addiction. It's not drugs, it's not alcohol, it's not gambling, it's not, things that are more commonly perceived as bad addictions. But I believe there's the same patterns and trends, which is you work hard, you get reward, it feels good, you do more of it. I have to say, when I've been dealing with grief, when my father passed or when my marriage
Mm,
fell apart, my managers have been able to say, "Why don't you take some time off?" And I've been guilty of saying, "Well, actually, I'd rather work. I'd rather work because that level of doing something that I know that I'm good at is a
mm,
little bit numbing." It's a way to be like,
mm,
"Okay, I'm gonna go do this. I'm gonna go design. I'm gonna go do a
mm,
strategy document," 'cause then it's a way to mitigate some of the grief. So I completely relate to some of the
mm.
things that you've been saying. And I work with many, many high achievers who are aware of this as a sometimes an issue, because there's times when it is an issue in your life and there's other times when it's not. Going back to the instance we talked about, there's periods of your life where you are going to do this and you're committed to this and you've set up the structures for this. So yeah, a little bit of a maybe distinction between
Mm,
workaholism and developing habits of a work ethic, but I
mm.
agree with you that there's definitely there can be negative correlations.
Yeah, I feel like, and again, this is subjective, like
Of course.
just, like some of the greatest people that I've led ha- really struggled from day to day. There's, you talking bipolar, you're talking about the level of creativity, the focus, the need to do good work,
Yeah.
is almost like, um, it's tied up with their sense of well-being, which could be problematic. It is problematic. And you may deal, I would deal with the fallout of that. So it
Mhm.
was just something that a thought that passed my mind as we
Yeah.
were talking. So
I would
now, yeah, go
I would
ahead.
actually take it one step further because I work with a lot of startup co-founders, and that's even trickier because work is not just tied up with well-being. Work is your identity. When your
Yeah.
company, your startup is
Yeah.
something you have made, and that becomes really challenging to separate.
Yeah, I actually just finished a piece of work with a couple founders, and unfortunately, whilst the business has a lot of potential, one of the co-founders um, is a lot of superpowers there, but there's a lot of negativity because of insecurity and imposter syndrome, and because of the fact, and we've had this conversation, and I put the mirror up that he feels he is one and the same with the company. When you say the company's name, in his mind, it is synonymous with his name.
Yep.
And he will do anything to protect the the view he has of himself
Yep.
and shield his insecurities, but it's kind of a grenade in his environment, like,
Yeah.
because he was operating that way, and because there's this such a tight connection to the success of the company,
Yep.
he's got his arms around it so tight he can't let the help come in
Yep.
because he's made it about himself.
Yep. Now I've seen that a lot. I think it's pretty common for almost every startup founder, especially if it's a solo founder, to feel that in the early parts of their journey, especially I'd say what 10 people, 20 people, like that size. And because I work with a lot of people through seed, series A, series B, I think there's a point when you're and again, I'm using Silicon Valley, perhaps venture terms more, but when you get this series A funding, it's you've already proven product market fit and you're about to hit this hockey stick growth. I think that's the particular period of time where there does need to be a little more separation of identity, because this is the part where your role is changing. You've got to learn to delegate. You've got to learn to build up more of an executive team, and it's not simply
Mhm,
you. And I think
mhm.
that is one of the really critical chasms for startup founders.
Yeah, it's uncanny because we were, um, we were going into Series A, and we were waiting for the funds, and there was a lot of stress, and I was there to implement a go-to-market strategy, like really execute. Because one of the frustrating things I find with founders, and this is kind of moving away, but related to work ethic, is I'm an execution guy.
Yep.
Right. Like I was a head in the clouds guy, but I think the way I was mentored by people was they forced me to get better at execution.
Mm-hmm.
And I value execution probably more now. And I think I get really frustrated with too much airy fairy, right? Like too many, like and I think that's what I was there to do.
Yep.
And it was a challenging experience because we had individuals that wanted to keep their heads in the cloud. And I was like, well, we got to get on with it. We got to develop a product, roadmap and XYZ.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. And I just talking about this, like I'm kind of in a transition period. I've exited a firm, and I've been thinking, like, do I continue to try to work with founders in terms of helping them with the go-to-market?
Mm-hmm.
And was this an isolated event, or is this kind of a problem that I'm going to come up against where they say we need to grow, and then when I get in there to drive accountability, and do things, it becomes maybe a little bit challenging. Like, what's your view? Like, if we go down the startup route, like what's your experience been like when you're trying to work with founders?
So I don't think that particular use case that you described, I haven't seen that consistently, because it depends on so many factors. It depends on if it's a solo founder. It depends on if it's a team. Typically if it's a team, like co-founders, I've worked with pairs of co-founders, or sometimes like a trio. I haven't found the thing that you're describing to be consistent, because it's so different depending on the personalities coming in. The thing that I have more found to be consistent is this need to separate identity and to have a willingness to reassess roles and responsibilities of the CEO, of each of the founding team, and an openness to approach that looking and viewing of roles with the same flexibility and sense of experimentation as you would with your product or service. And that, I think, is a mindset shift that can be really hard, but often not, because you're already doing it for successful startup founders, especially multiple time founders, with knowing you've got to experiment and iterate. So you got to do that with your role as well. And most of the work I do is facilitating the conversations with co-founders and board persuasion that this is changing. This is how it's changing with delegation. So that particular use case you were talking about, I've seen it, but I haven't seen it consistently as a trend.
These startups start to accumulate more investment, there'd be also pressure from the investors as well. Like, if they identified that there was a lack of skill set within the founder base too, right? So you've got some of that playing out too, or?
I found venture firms just have different philosophies.
Yeah.
Some are much more, here's the money. Others are much more heavily invested and supportive. But there generally is trust, and it varies too. So, across the board.
Well, it was a bit of a digression, but an interesting digression. Like, and that's what we like to do. Like,
that, but it was fun.
Yeah. You know what it is. I think it's relevant for me, and I always like to have conversations that are relevant and topical.
Of course.
So we'll move back to work ethic, and as we start to land the plane, Tutti, first of all, I wanted to thank you for the conversation. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to learn that it is. The HBR said that it was one of the most kind of looked up topics, yet there wasn't really a lot of information on it. Say that I want to improve and get better. We talk about habits on the show. Like, if I want to start to habituate some things that could move me towards a better work ethic, what could I do?
Yeah, I think there's two parts that can be really interesting to think about that I've seen consistently over time. One is a question of prioritization, right? We always have too much to do, and you're never going to finish that damn to-do list. I think it's just a state of acceptance to get to that. So two things. One, I think it's important going into a week to have a sense of, all right, what is my stack ranked most important thing? One most important thing. Aim for one. Maybe that'll spill over into 2 or 3, but not 10. Aim for the one most important thing. And then also be aware that, hey, we live in an ever evolving world. So fire drills happen, things change, and just keep revisiting that each day. Reprioritize each day. You can do the same thing daily and then on a weekly basis. And it is an exercise. It's a little bit of an exercise in self-discipline.
Yeah.
It's hard to say no to things, but I have shiny object syndrome just as much as everyone else. I want to do this and this and this. There's a lot of passions, but when you say yes to everything, you're kind of also saying no to anything. So it's that prioritization that I think really helps that work ethic to get to what's most important done. So that's one of them. And I had another one, but we can pause. I wanted to pause for a minute to see if you had.
Yeah, look, I think, for me, starting to really understand the essentials,
Mhm.
because I think, and a lot of the audience, a lot of people that would watch Ultra Habits would have a big engine, like they can do a lot, right? Like that old adage, you want to, get something done, give it to a busy person. But the reality is, through this kind of fragmented, splintered focus, like what's the cost of that?
Yep.
And we tend to think there isn't, but there is. Particularly as I get older, I notice it too. With kids, I don't own my own time anymore, so like I don't have that level of
Very familiar.
flexibility, right? So you kind of have to become even more ruthless.
Yep.
And I think when you do that, like when you're very clear on your true north and then what activities are supporting that, you're just calmer through the day.
Yeah.
You ring fence things. A lot of the noise of the world kind of dissipates.
Mhm.
And yeah, that was a fundamental shift for me. So I completely agree with what you just said there, Tutti.
Yeah. And I think the corollary of that is you're never going to finish your to-do list. So let go of that desire of perfection.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
That's a totally tough one. And I have trouble with it every day too.
Yeah.
The second one that I have that I think is a very crucial one for work ethics is understand what benefits the team and the company and not just what benefits you. Of course, we're all very human and we all are single-minded in this is what I need to get done because this is going to get me success in that project, this promotion, it's going to get me that sale, that new business. But really, I think the offset of that is, all right, what is the motivation behind this? Is it solely to benefit me, or how is this also in the best interest of my greater company and
Yeah.
team? And I find that is always the source of friction, conflict, dealing with difficult people, relationship issues. It's like really looking and taking that nuanced eye of to develop a really good work ethic, a strong work ethic, hold the team interests higher than your own.
Well, that I think that was a brilliant way to close today. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm gonna have to talk to you later because I think there's other topics that we can dive into here. I don't have a sense for your wider expertise, which I'm gonna go back and really unpack. I really wanted to
We
be
started
focused on
playing.
this article.
We started
Yeah, but
playing with a lot of them. They just all come
yeah,
up.
yeah, man. I think there's a lot that we can talk about. I mean, we could talk about habits of the founders, and in Australia, we've got a founders program here that a friend of mine started, which has been pretty successful. They monitor heart rates and sleep, and that whole piece around just trying to keep founders shit together, basically, right? As they
Yep.
try to do what they're doing. But for our audience that want to find you and learn more about you, where do they go?
Yeah, you can go to my website, which is tuttitaygerly.com, TUTTITAYGERLY. And I'm pretty easy to find on all the social networks, most active on LinkedIn and Instagram.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Tutti.
Absolutely. This was a ton of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.